All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this fireside webinar. I am Cody Ellingham, Business Development Manager at HortPlus. We've got a 10 o'clock start. Hopefully, might have a few more people join in, but we might just jump into it. I want to welcome you to this discussion about weather data in New Zealand. We've got 30 minutes penciled in for a fireside chat. And after that, I am hoping that we can do a Q&A afterwards. Now, today, if you do have any questions or comments, please put them into the chat. Um, Otherwise, at the end, we will open up the Q&A to talk through a few things about weather data in New Zealand. So hopefully that's all good. Now, I am joined today by HortPlus Director Mike Barley, and I hope that we can have a conversation that shares with you some of our insights along the way when it comes to managing and making use of weather data. So now HortPlus's business is really about data. We provide weather, disease, and decision support insight to the primary sector with our roots in Hort and Ag in New Zealand. But really, we are a software company, and we're very lucky to collaborate with a lot of incredible people and organizations, including forecasters, hardware companies, and other experts. And I think some of you are on the call today, so that's really cool to see. Um, Now, one of the big themes of today, excuse me, is really asking the question about how we can leverage collaboration and network effects to get the best weather data possible and really to enable business and research success in New Zealand and what that could mean for the future. So I think I want to throw it over to you, Mike, actually, just to sort of kick things off. And Hort Plus has been doing weather data for 25 years. It's a long time. I mean, how would you broadly characterize the changes in that time?
Thanks, Cody. Yeah, 25 years is a long time, and there has been a lot of change over that period. I think where we've seen the most change is probably in the hardware space or just the access to hardware. There's so much more stations and sensors and that sort of thing available today compared to 25 years ago where the stations were a rarity, and now they're really common.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of cost of hardware has gone down as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we're not in the hardware space, but we see it, we experience it as a result of being on the software side of things. Um, the other space, I think, is around the telemetry. It's a lot easier to collect the data off the stations these days.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? Because I mean, there's been certainly the rollout of things like 4G and kind of more coverage, especially in some of the rural regions. I mean, how have you seen that affect things?
We just see more stations come online. It means that the hardware works in locations where it previously wouldn't, or uh, it's cheaper basically. Where it would have been cost prohibitive to have telemetry in some rural parts of the country. It's now a lot less expensive.
Yeah. Well, I think as well, if we understand the geography of New Zealand, I mean, it's sort of these long, spindly islands, and obviously you have a lot of microclimates. You have sort of different weather, just up the valley, sort of a thing, and being able to get that on-site data is really important. And I mean, telemetry. I mean, there is still some areas I think that are hard to get 4G coverage, but those are increasingly rare. But being able to have more stations that are more cost effective has certainly enabled that broader network to build out. But I mean, that's in terms of, say, individual, users putting in weather stations, individual farmers, etc. But we've also seen the emergence of national weather data networks. And so, sort of talking about that for a moment, I mean, because I know there is a few that we work with very closely. Um, I mean, how have you seen that grow as well?
So definitely in terms of individual station or individual grower stations or individual user stations, I think there's again, just coming back to that access and being able to out of the box, off the shelf, get something up and running really quickly has enabled that. The other thing I'd add to that is there are corporates, there are bigger corporates that have, where the data needs and putting in networks or a number of stations to service their needs as well.
Yeah. And I guess coming back though, I mean, this idea that there is the ability to put in more stations, the hardware's become more affordable. We've been able to get telemetry set up and running. coming back to the case though for weather data and why it is important, I think it goes without saying in the primary sector, weather is a major input and major consideration. But maybe just talking about that for a moment. I mean, kind of the idea of what weather data could mean and what the value proposition is.
I think, as you say, anything outside is affected by weather. Basically, all the primary is in that box. Um, and I think that in the past where you've had to rely on weather data elsewhere or close to, the availability of hardware and the ease of access means that you're able to get on site or more localized information.
And I think part of that, though, this on-site information, something you and I often talk about in the context of horticulture, is the ability to have a site history,
Mm.
and being able to have historical weather information. And so, looking at it from that lens, I mean, how would you situate the idea of historical weather data, and kind of the importance of a site's history?
Yeah, I think it's really important. Uh, that's where there's a lot of value when you start getting that longer term weather data for a single location. You're able to start doing some comparisons that you wouldn't be able to do without that. But what I would say is with that long-term data, it's a lot harder to collect long-term data than what people may realize because there's so many things, there's so many challenges that can arise as a result of that. And so part of the value of that long-term data is just having it record for that long and maintaining a data quality standard.
Yeah, I mean, pulling on that thread a little bit, talking about data quality standards and I guess what a site means, because you might have the hardware swap out, there's stations get retired, etc. But that kind of data quality, I mean, maybe we can talk a bit about that. Like, what does data quality mean? How would you sort of contextualize that?
So I think there's different use cases. Different users have different use cases, and there's certainly different uncertainties that different users need or are willing, able to accept, and that sort of thing. So that has a large effect on how regular something is maintained, which has an effect on data quality. It's how responsive um, you know the station owner is to anything that needs to happen in that space. But yeah, at the end of the day, it does come down to data quality,
Mm. Well,
weather data quality.
yeah, I mean, because I guess there's sort of two approaches here, because there is sort of, I guess, corporate or national networks of weather stations that are maybe maintained more on a scheduler basis. And then there's quite a lot more hardware that's coming out that's maybe an individual piece that's owned by a farmer or some organization, but it's just maybe one or a few stations. And so you've got questions around siting. Calibration is a big question as well. And this maybe isn't super aware. So it's almost like buyer beware, sort of, once you get a station, there is, I think, some understanding that their calibration is part of the ownership of that piece of hardware. So, I mean, taking that into account, talking about sighting challenges, maybe calibration, even maintenance, because again, these things are out in the real world. And you and I mean, I've cleaned enough weather stations that, they've been out and they've had a sprayer go past them, or, bugs and things
Yes.
get into into the rain gauge and stuff. There's a lot of these kind of real world challenges. So, I mean, sort of, what's the reality check on the sighting challenge side of things?
So in terms of siting, I think there's when you work with weather stations sort of long enough, you kind of get a bit of a gist of what's a good site and what isn't. On the back of the shed isn't ideal. Right next to the hedge, those sorts of things. So locations that are going to affect the environment or the monitoring of that environment are not ideal. But then in some cases, there's not the big flat field of grass that you can put it on. That is kind of the ideal location.
Yeah, because there is the WMO standard for what a site could be, which is it could be a little bit challenging, sort of the height of the sensors off the ground, the amount of clear space around it, etc. And in some cases, there might be stations that are set inside the canopy on an orchard, for example, or maybe there's some other reason that it's not able to meet that particular standard, but it doesn't mean that that site is not valuable. So, I mean, how would you, starting to get into this idea that there's various kinds of setups, I mean, how would you sort of situate that?
Well, that's where I think what I was talking about before around different users have different use cases
Mm.
and with different requirements for the type of weather data that they're after. So I think what a really important part of that is it comes down to documenting or the metadata that goes with the station and having that available and accessible, which is definitely something that we can improve on. But just circling back to what you're saying before around not so much the buyer beware, but it is a commitment. If you want a weather station to last a long time, it is a time and resource commitment to maintain it and to keep it going. And as you say, I don't think that's always abundantly clear to just Joe Blogs off the street that buys a weather station and wants it to last for years.
Well, it's an idea that you and I have sort of bounced around is like this warrant of fitness. It's sort of like owning an old car. It's sort of you got to check in on it, and especially when it's out in the real world and it's there's humidity, there's all sorts of environmental impacts on the hardware and the sensors. There is a period of time where you do need to go and check it, clean it, maintain it, and that can sort of get lost amongst all the other things that someone has to do. And so that sort of periodic maintenance of it is really important. Otherwise, you lose that connection to a valid, reliable data set, which sort of starts introducing a lot of noise into what decisions you can make, right? So there's sort of this sort of challenge where if you want to put a piece of hardware, on a farm or in a place, you need to make sure that it's being maintained. And I don't know, it's sort of yeah, it's not always maybe clear upfront that that's part of the deal, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it gives a level of reliability,
Yeah.
when you have something like that in place. But we've had stations that just there's constantly something happening to it, and it's just we call it's got the curse. There's
We've
there's
had
constantly
a
something
state
going wrong with it.
had a
Yeah,
station wash away once, like
yeah,
yeah.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. And there's other stations that just are breezy. There's hardly any issues and that sort of thing. So it's you know, I think monitoring the data is potentially an area that could really help in that space.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's something, I mean, we do with our network, right? We monitor data. So, I mean, talking about that, because I guess that could mean different things to different people, but the idea of data monitoring, data quality checking, etc. I mean, maybe we can expand on, I guess, some of the automatic side of things and also some of the human intuition involved there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, I guess, and just circling back to the theme of the talk and the collaboration side of things, um, I think that there's a lot of weather data networks out there. There's a lot of data monitoring that's happening and that sort of thing. There's data monitoring where I believe that I I guess the mindset that I take is why can't every station be a good station? What's holding bad stations back from being good stations? My theory behind that is if you don't know that it's bad data coming off it, so notification, um, and then or detection, sorry, and then notification, being told that look, there's something wrong with the station, that it needs attention type thing. So um, as I say, there's we've got NIWA, we've got Met Service, we've got some really big organizations that are doing amazing jobs to collecting all this data and been doing it for years and years. You know, is there opportunities where we can collaborate in that space to all benefit, I guess, in a way from in that getting every station to be a good station.
Yeah, I think on that note, because there is these sort of backbones and these kind of long, long established networks out there. You mentioned a few, and also some of the corporate networks and our own network of stations. You've got Plant and Food. You've got different people who we work with, and really strong relationships there. But being able to sort of cross-check data, being able to sort of use that network, especially given New Zealand's topography and again this sort of long, slender islands that can have very different climates just a few kilometers up the road. Being able to leverage that is something that's very interesting. So, I mean, talking about that, I mean, what does that look like? I mean, just sort of thinking about this, sort of, yeah,
Um, so taking the business case out of the puzzle, because that's where things can get complicated. I think um, I don't know, some sort of open network or some sort of, I don't want to say a standard, some guidelines or something where information about a station is available or shared, maybe a ideating here like a marketplace or something, or something where it's really clear as to where the data is available and where you can get it from almost.
Mm. Well, I mean, just take, I mean, I mean, looking at the innovation side, I mean, again, I think New Zealand is there's a lot of challenges, right, with the weather and a changing climate, and it seems like this weather data, it's such an important sort of informational resource to enabling so many things, and I mean, even stepping outside of horticulture, ag, the primary sector more generally is certainly this this is going to play a big piece in that, and it seems like it's almost like a national strategic asset to have a powerful weather data um, resource available, for any kind of business. It's sort of a value add for the nation. And I think I mean, that's something I'm certainly passionate about. What does it mean on an economic level to be able to empower many businesses with this thing? So, I mean, if we look at something like the internet or other things that have this network effect, there's something there where the more people who participate, the better it becomes. And so this is maybe where we get to the idea of why can't all stations be good stations?
Mm.
Because if you can sort of bring not only these established networks, but also individual stations onto a network, and they all sort of can add value. I mean, that's quite a powerful idea potentially.
Yeah, yeah, or self-check against each other, or clustering units that are close together or similar. Um, I know doing that ourselves with isolated stations is really difficult to determine if weather data is, you know, really bad or it really is bad or is actually just a weird climate phenomenon that kind of happens. So
Yeah.
having more stations in an area makes such a big difference to that.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing as well, we've got some really awesome hardware manufacturers as well, the likes of Harvest and others who are putting out really good stuff. And, these excellent pieces of equipment that are used internationally. And um, that the ability to bring that in, different kinds of stations, and be able to have, I guess, an apples for apples comparison. Because I mean, there is some technical detail as well around the different
Yeah,
kinds of
definitely.
sensors. I mean, maybe just a word on that. And I say even something like left wetness or some of these more technical aspects, which can, I guess there's different sensor types, there's different ways of measuring that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that there's just going to continue to be more and more hardware, put out there and more hardware made available. Um, and more manufacturers, getting into the space as it becomes cheaper and cheaper to build these units. Um, Places where we haven't seen sensors, there might be sensors added because the cost to deploy them and to telemeter them becomes so low that that it becomes viable to be able to do that. So I don't see the number of sensors or the hardware reducing. If anything, I see it just escalating.
Yeah. And I mean, that brings up a question again. I mean, if you talk about in canopy or sort of maybe
Mm.
more temporal situations, making use of that data, because if it's in canopy for just a season or it's not really um, I guess, maintained in that site, almost you get this sort of window of good data, and then you're not maybe able to make use of it. And I think there's this compound effect where if the longer it's been in site on site, this kind of Lindy effect, it becomes more valuable, right? Um, so yeah, interesting dynamic there where the hardware is becoming more affordable, but also maybe less of a long-term focus potentially.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
think I think you're right there. So yeah, more hardware is more data and more data, it becomes challenges with that. But then I think there's also some real opportunities where if we're able to, as you talked about, sort of open network or being able to connect up to multiple different types of hardware or whatever it happens to be, where we're able to start leveraging those scenarios.
Mm. Well, I mean, talking about that, coming back to the open network idea, again, that's sort of, I mean, just kind of a concept, but I take a lot of inspiration from something like open source software or, again, the internet, these kinds of networks that have a network effect that means that the value of everything increases as more participants join. Um, kind of couching that with the idea of data standards, which I think is often it can be quite a top-down concept, right? There's a WMO standard, there's a sort of a type of requirement for something. I mean, how would you connect those? Because it's sort of, there's almost like a minimum requirement, and then there's sort of, there can be a lot of
Yeah,
variety, but
yeah,
it can
there's a
still be a good
range.
station, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm always reluctant to get into standards because you
Let,
create a
let,
standard and there's one more standard, to meet. It's never going to be the standard to rule them all. So what I would say to that is what I would suggest is having some requirements around what you record about the station,
mm,
because where the station is placed, its environment, its height, the types of sensor, and its even the technical specifications of that sensor type, and that it would have its own range and whatnot. So perhaps coming to an agreement where every station has that minimum amount of information, because once you've got that, then you're able to then make a decision or draw a line in the sand and say, right, I won't accept anything above this or below that type thing. But just getting that information is already it's challenging.
yeah, well, it almost comes back to that warrant of fitness thing we talked about. Like, what what does it mean? Has a station been calibrated? Have we got a history of its sighting? How is it set up? And then that can be used to basically vouch for a site, that it's going to be given good data. And it means that we're no longer, you're not sort of putting it, you're not using the station hardware as I guess the definition of whether it's a good site or not. It's more about how it's been maintained and how it's been looked after, and that enables maybe a lot more things to come onto the network,
Yeah, and
potentially.
what your requirements are. If you're making multi-million dollar decisions, you're going to want really high quality data, or you're going to want very low amounts of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're just making a day-to-day decision that's not going to have huge effect, then you're willing to accept a whole lot more uncertainty in the data or in the station.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, this idea of sort of connect everything. I mean, on one end of that, it can be sort of hobbyist stations, maybe places in urban sites, etc., that are maybe not super relevant for the primary sector. But then on the other hand, I mean, there is certainly a lot of hardware out there that's been
Yeah,
used. Maybe stuff's been used for frost alerts. Maybe stuff's been used for one particular, maybe just the rain gauge, even though it's got temperature and humidity on it. And sort of being able to bring that in and having a process, because that's something you and I have talked about, and we've talked to others about as well. Is sort of how do you how do you approach a site and sort of understand, from 0 to 1. You've got, a new site comes along that's had an established station, maybe hasn't been looked after. How do you sort of go from that to, getting it to a usable state?
yeah. I mean, it depends what state it's in to begin with, but I think it comes down to having some again, it's just depends on what the user needs, but having some standards around use that word again,
Oh, because
having
we've
some
seen,
guidelines around
yeah.
maintenance around when it was last calibrated, um, and I guess the monitoring of the data is probably the biggest thing that would help there, because if you don't know what's wrong until you've got something to compare against. Generally, well, it's generally easy to find the things that when there's 50 mil of rain, the,
Well,
the, the rain gauge
yeah.
is broken.
There's two examples that come to mind. So I know we've certainly sent out loggers, like, small
Yeah, yeah,
coin-sized loggers to go to a site, and just to give an idea of how the temperature sensor and that is going, temperature and humidity, for example. But then the other way is, yeah, again, you just compare it to a site that's nearby. And this is what I was asking you about earlier, but there's sort of that human intuition, because that's
yeah.
maybe not something that you can automate so easily, right?
Well,
Or maybe you can.
anyone that works with weather data for a little while, you kind of get to recognize the patterns, and what sort of sits outside the pattern, for the most part. But in this day and age of technology, why haven't we cracked that one yet? Or I don't know, maybe someone has, and
Yeah.
we just haven't figured it out. But this we seem to be in such a position of uh, having more power with more data, or more insight with more data, I don't know, maybe this is a ripe for, disruption in terms of, automated, data checking in a cluster or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, I mean, because that's something. I mean, just humbly, we've been exploring a little bit. I mean, we've been working with the University of Auckland, and trying to explore this. I mean, maybe that's something you can just connect with what you just said, though. Sort of this
Yeah,
idea of,
yeah.
yeah,
So just, I guess it's I don't think it's a new concept. It's a new concept for us to implement, but just trying to find an automated way, whether that's a data model or whatever it happens to be, where we're using, stations in a cluster
yeah.
to
And that's what. Sorry,
to
that's just what. Just around that project in particular, though, with the university. If you want to expand on that, yeah.
yeah, yeah, that is
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
the
that because
project.
that's like it was a 3 month trial that we were trying out with that.
Yeah, yeah. So it was an industry project with the Auckland University with a data science master's student, and so we gave him a whole lot of data to look to help us with automating the data validation. And so yeah, he's been working on a data model to try and help with that. And
Yeah,
in the first instance, to try and make it achievable. It was just can you identify where someone might need to look at it? Because if you've got 600 stations to monitor, if you can narrow that down to 100, you've saved so much time already. So just being able to flag things that don't quite look right, and then have a person step in and then make the call whether that needs further attention or not.
yeah. It's interesting. I mean, something about things that don't scale. It's often a really interesting space to explore because they might not seem like they scale at first, but then you can find a way. And I think this idea that you can kind of just maybe take the edge off it by having a little bit of automation, kind of sanity checking at the front, and then still you need someone to maybe look at it and kind of understand the history of a site, sort of intuit what it means. Maybe that's the slightly harder piece. But yeah, I mean, certainly, I mean, how's that coming along though? Because I'm just trying to remember if that project's still underway or has that come
It just wrapped up. So
just
he's
wrapped up?
he's sent through his thesis and done his presentation. So we'll find his results out soon.
Yeah,
But it's looking good.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, just that the space of data checking. This is weather data. We're not. I don't think we're discovering anything particularly new here. But by collaborating with others, we can put our experiences together to come up with something that would potentially, struggle to get to individually.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think that was one of the sort of the impetus for this talk. Really, was you and me talking with others, especially in the research space, and understanding that it's sort of the same problem, the same challenge coming up with it. It's like, well, we're trying to
There
run a
must be,
trial. Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Why is it that every time you go to get the weather data that you want, there's a sensor issue,
yeah.
and that happens on research trials, it happens for us, it happens for industries and all sorts. So it's not uncommon, that's for sure.
Well, even beyond that, just getting the weather data that you want. I mean, again, a lot of this can be very valuable stuff, very valuable research that's taking place, and maybe the sites are not available in the places where you would like them, etc. It's sort of it has this flow-on effect where maybe the research isn't able to be completely done to the standard you'd like, etc. So it's sort of this it's this kind of natural this resource that is so valuable to enabling a lot of other stuff. And I think that's what we've started talking about is like what would it take to make that more accessible
Mm.
um, for everybody, commercial and research, etc. And what would that then enable, I guess, from a kind of national perspective as well, without, I'm not in a position to sell that, but, what does it mean for the New Zealand project to have, good weather data available for everybody,
Yeah, I think if you talk to any researcher that's done some monitoring, they've been in the position where it's failed or something's gone wrong and they've had to join the data or do some modeling to fill in the gaps or whatnot. So um, it's a good question and it's good to just think about what that would mean, and on the larger scale, rather
Yeah.
than, just the immediate value that the scientist or researcher would have of just knowing that the data is going to be complete at the end of the research trial. But on a wider scale, that
Yeah.
would be pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think again, as a piece of infrastructure, it's like having a national highway network or or trains or electricity or even 4G. These things, they enable a kind of a capital investment that enables a lot of other things to happen on top.
A
And I
road
think,
network's a good analogy.
yeah, and it's like if a place isn't connected by roads or any other kind of means of transportation, it's sort of economically, it's not going to be able to achieve its full potential. And I think, given the primary sector nature of all of New Zealand, again, even offshore stuff, what's happening with winds and tides and all of that stuff as well, and the wider
Mm.
economic zone, it's like having that available. It's sort of yeah, without I think also couching that without it being sort of a call to some sort of I guess governmental type intervention because that can be sort of a long-winded project. I think can it sit with the private sector and the public without becoming sort of the pink elephant? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, that road network, I like that because there's different types of roads, and the more rural you get, you get onto dirt roads, and you can't travel 100k, or only a few
Yeah,
people can travel
you forgot
100k
about
on
that.
on gravel roads.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And just sort of one final thing, and then I am keen to actually we've had a few questions come through. Keen to open up, and if anyone has any questions so far as well, just throw it into the chat. But this idea of combining networks, Mike, because I know we've just announced connectivity with the Australian BOM network, Bureau of Meteorology. Is that 600 sites?
yeah. It's about 600 sites all over
Yeah.
Australia and a few of the islands and that sort of thing. Um, I a few years ago, we changed our approach to weather data. We were very much a closed, what I'd call a closed network. And with the hardware that was becoming available and the ease of access of weather stations, I could see that things were changing and we were going to be in a position where there was a lot more weather data available. So we kind of changed that to look at connecting, connecting some other stations, and now that's evolved into let's just connect everything and make everything, or at least make our system compatible with everything. So the BOM in Australia was one example of that. The Harvest network, or Harvest types of weather stations, the Metris types of weather stations, the Hilltop with the councils. There's a long list of different hardware providers or systems that are out there that are collecting weather data that I'm really keen to be compatible with.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's sort of
because I
this
think,
agnostic approach, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah. So I think if we can do that, and that's why I think we're as we're doing that more and more, we're finding the challenges of having different hardware and different sensors and having that information to be able to make those comparisons or make fair comparisons or even present that to the users so they can make their own call as to what they'd like to use and what's below their level of requirements.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you and I have been on that journey together, and certainly talk. There's a few people on this call as well that we've been talking to, and I certainly think that collaborative approach, connecting people's stuff, connecting everything,
Making use of
and
the hardware,
make
yeah.
use of the hardware, and then being able to sort of bubble that up into value, because it's sort of there's so much more that we can do in New Zealand and Australia, I must say as well. There's a lot of awesome stuff coming out in the disease space, irrigation. There's a whole lot of higher level innovations that are happening that kind of are powered by weather data. And so I think being able to enable that in a way that's also, I think, important for us is in a way that's not siloed. And when I say
Mm.
siloed, I mean stuff that, the stuff goes in, but it's hard to get out. I think that can be a little bit challenging, right? You sort of data ownership becomes a real question, right? And maybe actually we could just spend a minute on that, sort of this idea of data ownership and sort of being able to make use of data. What are your thoughts on that?
So when it comes to data ownership, I think at the end of the day, the station owner owns the data, and that's there needs to be a good model that works. There needs to be a good permission system in place around just knowing, where that data is being used and that sort of thing. Um, what was data ownership? What was the other thing you asked about? Sorry, Cody.
Yeah, just I mean, data ownership and then that kind of siloing where being able to
Right.
make use of it. But it seems like you sort of with that permission concept that sort of helps with that, right? Because you can sort of enable services on top, but sort of check the box kind of thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. The ability to grant and revoke access, I think is really important, and leaving that up to the data, the owner of the station to be able to control, and they'll always have that decision.
Yeah.
But in terms of siloing and stations, one of the challenges is that you don't know where the data exists, and so quite often we'll see stations go, be installed next to each other or within a really close range. Whereas if there was just a bit of communication or a bit of awareness around where the station locations, there'd be a hell of a lot better coverage.
Mm.
Um, that's generally speaking, because I don't know the specific cases for those, the ones being close together. There could be something specific why that happened, but I mean, if you're looking for weather data, there's no real easy place to go to say, right, in all of New Zealand, NIWA's got their network, Net Service has their network, Plant and Food, whoever, they're all very separated at the moment. There's not one place where you can just understand where can I get, if I need some weather data, where can I get that from?
Yeah, there's sort of that meta approach, right, where you can sort of see where the sources are and what's available. And again, that sounds like it's sort of a public resource. It's sort of something that enables anyone to come and build a business or a concept. It can be activated on top of that and
Mm.
add value because again, it's without the roads, you can't get from A to B, and without the weather data, there's so many decisions that are downstream of that, which is very, very interesting. But I guess we'll take a quick look. We had a few questions come through, Mike. So the first one here we had from Monica just around, or was a comment just around the idea of clustering and self-checking of sensors. It's really interesting. I think Dr. David Manctelo's done maybe a little bit of work on that. I think Monica says
Yeah, yeah.
here.
I think a lot of people have done work in this space,
Yeah.
and that's contributes to the collaboration. How can we leverage that rather than reinventing wheels here?
We've had good chats with David Manctelo about this concept, and I think it's been in the pipeline for a long time. People have been talking about it, but it seems like maybe it is coming to a bit of a head that we could see this at scale potentially. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. The more stations we connect, the more that becomes a viable option as we have more clusters.
Yeah, and Chris has said here, not all sensors are the same quality, especially rain gauges, which is something we've got a lot of
Mm.
experience with. There's something to be aware of, and I think that's what I was getting at earlier. Rain gauges, leaf wetness. I mean, there can even be different types of measurement. I mean, some places are like 10-minute data feeds, others will be like, 15 minutes, and
Hourly, or yeah, yeah.
I mean, a lot of that, I guess, a lot of that complexity gets taken away, especially when we're ingesting the data because we give a standard format on the output, right? We say,
So that's where the metadata, I think, around stations is going to become really important, or it does become really important.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think standardizing that side of things, because I guess that's what we were getting at earlier. You can have different networks, and maybe they're doing things in different ways, but having a standard output that you can access is part of that value proposition, because otherwise it can be just too much work trying to change,
It is a lot of work connecting to different hardware. I can tell you firsthand.
Oh, really? What have we got here as well? Andrew said weather data is very fixed, physical. The event happens at a time and a place. Humans are biological and they will follow the path of least resistance. So having automatic alerts
Mm. I
can
like
be really
automation in
important.
that the alerting, so that the monitoring, automating and monitoring, and then automating alerting, because my thinking is that if someone's making decisions off the data, they generally want it to be good data. And if they're made aware that, the sensor isn't working as expected or is outside the range for everyone else, there's a high chance that they're going to want to do something about it.
Yeah. So those are really interesting. The other thing Andrew said here, the fact that some data is not as reliable as you'd like, and data owners don't realize it. So maybe that's a sign that people are not making decisions based specifically on that data, and they're still maybe going with a gut feel or something.
Yeah, yeah. Or they go to look at the rain gauge and it's been blocked for 6 months, and so they can't make the decision off it because they haven't, been made aware that data's not reliable.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, I guess this comes back to, I guess, the broader concept that we've been talking about. And certainly, if anyone on this call is keen to talk about this, feel free to reach out to myself or Mike. But basically, this idea of collaboration in this space, because I think there's definitely a lot of room here to move things forward. And I think, again, with the New Zealand project in mind, having something having something like this could really be a game changer. And it could exist in many different ways. You know, maybe it's a little bit less of a monolithic project and more like just a few different things starting to get connected.
Yeah,
Um, I think a lot of stuff's already out there. It's almost just a case of bringing it together, right?
bringing it together and finding the experts that understand it well enough to be able to implement something that is, practical without it, like say, being a big too monolithic.
Yeah. Jessica has just said here, for pest and disease research, the microclimate in a crop canopy can make a big difference for the development, mortality, phenology, etc. They've done a lot of, with PFR, they've done a lot of regression between measurements at, say, 1.5 meters. And how would how would we know these kinds of data are available, or do we need to own our own research weather stations? You could probably see that comment there, Mike, as well. But um, I mean, that's really interesting, like the in canopy stuff we were talking about earlier. Um,
So,
yeah,
um, I'm not an expert in this space, but I've worked with a lot of different scientists who have been surrounded by different comments and that sort of thing. The way that I understand it is having an out of canopy standardized, measurement is really important. And then I think what that could be augmented with is in canopy sensors, but the big challenge with in canopy sensors is that they're really corrosive environments when it comes to spraying. The chemicals and that can be pretty harsh on the sensors, so it makes it really difficult. So in terms of regressions, we haven't done anything in that space. But you talk about, Jessica, the 1.5 meter and that sort of thing. So again, it just sort of comes back to that metadata that I'm really keen to start collecting around all the stations so is it 1.5 or is it 1 or is it 2 meters above the ground, and how far in the canopy is it, and how far above the ground is it, and all those metrics that go with those measurements.
yeah, and there's probably a lot more as well in terms of like what is the canopy setup like. You know, I'm sure there's more detail there that would be very valuable because we're also seeing, I mean, with the horticulture specifically, there's changing planting setups and all sorts, you know. So being able to have insight into that, what's the density? You know, are these big trees or you know the small ones? You know, there's sorts of things like that which maybe would be useful when you're in that kind of browsing mode, looking for data to
Yeah,
compare
yeah.
against. Yeah.
And you're right, if it's in canopy, the environment will change, especially, during the winter versus during the summer.
Yeah. Um, cool. I think. Oh yeah. Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, we've covered quite a lot of stuff. Mike. I mean, I guess maybe just circling back though to some of these big concepts. Just conscious of time and that. But and if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to throw those into the chat. But I mean, what are the big ideas here, Mike? Because I guess we're working with a lot of different people. I mean, we sort of on a practical level, you know, that this is a daily thing for us, is working with weather data. What would you say are the big takeaways for, I guess, where things are going and what we're looking at?
Um, where things are going, I think there's just a hell of a lot more sensors and hardware that's going to continue to become available. Um, where where I'd like things to go is that it's more commonly known how to manage that hardware. And I think there's a role of software to play in that, where whether that's the clustering or automated monitoring or whatever it happens to be, keeping the hardware owners or station owners aware that when things need attention. Because
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah, and I guess that's something. I mean, certainly we're doing more and more of on our end, and certainly we're seeing some opportunities in that space, and so that's something. I mean, I guess we're happy to talk to people about, happy to collaborate. I guess keen to have the conversation, if
yeah,
I can, yeah, put it like that. Keen to hear from people who are working on stuff, and that's certainly the conversation we've had with some real innovative companies who are doing stuff. As I said, innovation, irrigation, different aspects of the growing process. We've been able to sort of help with the weather data side, which feeds into that. And I guess keen to share what we know and kind of help deliver value in that space, right?
yeah, yeah. we've been doing that for we've got a bit of experience in that space in terms of the delivery side of things, not just the data side of things, because while the data is a really important part of it, the delivery of that and making that available to the end users is also a pretty significant.
Yeah. And I guess on the horizon then, because I know we also deliver an API for weather data as well. But I guess is there anything else you wanted to share just in terms of what's coming up for HortPlus and what we're working on?
So for where we're heading is, as I say, I'm wanting to automate the data checking and do a lot more in that space. Make our we've got a we do have an API rebuild down the track that we're looking to do. So we'll be putting some feelers out for those that are interested to contribute on, what they would like to see or how they would like to use it to help us, build it in a way that is really ingestible. Um, yeah, that's kind of the immediate things, but the longer term vision is, as I say, let's get things connected up and let's get things operating, as best that we can.
Yeah. And that API that you mentioned, I mean, that's certainly some of the work that we've been doing with the University of Auckland and with others, trying to bring some of those learnings into it so that it's just easy to use. Because I mean, my vision, I guess from my side, is that we can have an API that people can just use and it
Yeah,
can feed it. You know, whatever the value add that your business or your research institute is looking at, you can just grab the weather data you need, and it just works. And I think that's, I guess, the big idea that you can get the data you need, and it's going to be high quality, and you can rely on it, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel and go and build your own network every time, right?
yeah, and that would be the carrot for connecting up your hardware is that it comes with some benefits around being notified or data monitoring or whatever it happens to be, and that can be for research trials or as well as commercial operations.
Yeah. Um, cool. Is there anything else? I think we've had a few good questions come through. If anyone's got any final questions, throw them into the chat. Otherwise, we might look to wrap up a few minutes early. And I see, oh, Andrew's added another thing here. I've had conversations with industry people about the data that they believed was becoming available from new technologies, but they had failed to appreciate the realities of what was happening operationally, which, yeah, I think speaks to what we talked about before. It can be quite corrosive out there in
Yeah,
the field. Um, cool. I've discussed a dashboard of weather-dependent information with. Where else did you get your future ideas from? We have a lot of chats, I must say, Andrew, me and Mike, and others. So, as I said, I mean, one of my closing remarks anyway would be like, if anyone ever wants to have a chat about this stuff, hit us up here at HortPlus. Always keen to talk innovation, what we can do, and globally focused as well, not just New Zealand.
Mm.
But um, Mike, is there anything else you wanted to add?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a hell of a lot already, just and sort of scratched the surface on a few things without falling down too many rabbit holes.
Yeah. Um, Cool. I think that was cool. We might wrap it up there. What we'll do though, if I hope everyone, so this is the first time me and Mike have done a webinar. If you enjoyed it, please let us know. We've got people who signed up from LinkedIn. I think we've got your email addresses, so we might hit you up if we do another chat in the future. But really keen to keep the conversation going and just yeah, talk about this stuff because I think there's a lot of opportunities out there. Cool.
Agreed.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this webinar. And yeah, I hope you have a good rest of your day. And we'll leave it there.
Sweet.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone.